Welcome back to Podcast Answers. I hope your podcasting week has been great. Here on Podcast Answers, we help people start and grow their podcast, all while answering podcasting questions along the way. And I just realized I don't think that I've ever explained exactly the choices that I make while editing audio, why I make it, how I do it, things like that. So I thought that this might be a good opportunity. I am having trouble keeping my inner monitor in. There we go. I thought this would be a good opportunity to chat with you a little bit about how I edit the podcast and how not specifically this podcast, because I don't really do a whole lot of editing in this podcast. So literally that's the gist of it. I don't do a whole lot of editing when it comes to this podcast, because this podcast for me, I've come a long way in my podcasting journey. And one of the things that I've done is I've always taken the mindset that I do it live to tape, meaning that everything that I do, I hit record and I really don't edit much at all. So with that being said, let's take a look at how I do the podcasting. Okay, so for me, what I do is I am recording into a Rodecaster Pro, which allows me to record multi-track. And the reason I do multi-track is because it allows me to have all of one recording. So like if you don't record multi-track, what ends up happening is you have one recording that has all of the sounds, all of the everything that you do, just all mixed together. The same way that you send that out to YouTube or to your podcasting apps. But this isn't really what you want to do if you need to edit. So for me, I always record in multi-track. So I have a track for my mic, I have a track for my sounds, I have a track for any guests coming in, things like that. All of that stuff I do. I have separate recording tracks for that, so that I can edit that in my podcast editing software. So let's take a look. If you're watching on YouTube, you're going to see if you're watching on YouTube, you are seeing my editing software I use. If you're watching on Instagram, I am sorry, you're not going to see this. You will just see a copy of me. I just realized I didn't have any picture there, so I added it real quick. That's the great thing about using the software that I use. I can just do it really quick. So if you were watching me on a video, you will see that I'm using Audition, Adobe Audition. And so what I do is I bring in to Adobe Audition every single track. So this is actually a podcast that I was editing for my other podcast, Dudes and Dads. I have a track for Andy. I have a track for Joel. I have a track for guests. I have a track for Mark. I have sound effects. All of that is showing up in my podcast editing software, Adobe Audition. And I just, for me, I like Adobe Audition. I always have. It's something that I've always used. So that's what I'm going to continue to use. But so again, I bring all of that in from my Rodecaster Pro, and I have each track. So I don't do a whole lot of editing per se in here, but I do some processing on the tracks. So I'm going to explain a little bit now how and what I do to process those tracks. And then after this, I'll get into a little bit how I edit and the choices that I make for other podcasts that I do edit down for my clients. So for this, we're going to take a look. So if I click on, let's say, Andy, my track Andy, what I do have down here, and you'll see this is the audio effects track. And the only thing I have is a dynamics track on that. So what that means is it allows you to do gating, compressor, expander, limiter, all of that things. So the only thing that I'm using on here is actually the gate, the auto gate, which essentially means that if I'm quiet, you don't hear anything. And the reason I do that is a lot of times I do have a small gate on my Rodecaster Pro, and I do use that just to kind of keep the noise down. But the reason I don't have it really aggressive is because if I talk really low and it cuts it off, I have no way once it's recorded to go back and edit that. So if I have it in my final track, I can always go ahead and edit it out. So I have a little bit more of an aggressive compressor on this. So again, my threshold is at 42 negative 42 dB, attack 1 millisecond, release 86.7 milliseconds, and hold 80 or 1 millisecond. So essentially, again, what that is doing is it's taking and it's compressing, or not compressing, it's gating, shutting the mic off when it is too quiet. So the nice thing about doing it in the software, though, as opposed to on my hardware, my Rodecaster, is, again, like I was saying, if I have that in the recording, then if I'm talking too low, I can go back and back that off just for a specific spot in the recording, and I can still hear the recording. If for some reason I have that in my hardware and I have my gate in my hardware set too aggressive, then when I go back, I don't have that data. I can't do anything about that data. I can't restore the data that isn't there because I don't have the data to restore. So that I'm using that same effects rack on all of my voice tracks in the podcast. Now, I don't have any of an effects rack on my sound effects, but I do have it on the main mix bus. So the main mix bus is, after all of these tracks are set, this is what's getting sent out to the file or wherever. So this main mix bus, and I do have two things in here: a dynamics and dynamics rack and a hard limiter, and I have them in those specific order. So the dynamics that I have set up for this one is a little bit different. I don't have any auto gating on this, but I do have a compressor. So I'm compressing the whole track just a little bit, and my things for that are negative 25 for my threshold, ratio of 3, 0.7 millisecond attack, and 50 millisecond release. And so what that does is that takes the whole thing, that takes all of the sounds together and compresses them. So compression essentially squeezes them a little bit. It says, okay, it's only allowed to get so loud, and as soon as it gets that level, I'm going to bring the volume down. I'm going to bring the volume down. I'm going to bring the volume down. So it's more even across the track. So if I'm quiet, it's still, to me, is going to sound about the same as if I talk loud like this. And it's not going to let it get so loud that it's going to overblow the thing. So that's the compressor, and I do that again on the full track, the full thing of how I'm doing this. I have the full compressor for my full track. And then the last thing that I do is I do have a hard limiter. So a hard limiter essentially says that your audio can get so loud, and it's just essentially going to brick wall it. It's just going to stop everything from happening. So what I do on this is my settings for this. I have maximum amplitude is -6. So I do want my max volume where it breaks the compression, or breaks the volume, at -6 dB. I do input boost my whole audio chain 17 decibels. So I do bring everything up and limit it, and then 7 millisecond look ahead and a 100 millisecond release time. So that is the way that I do. Those are the chain effects that I have on my podcasts, because I like having it to sound a certain way. So again, I tweak these per podcast. I do in Adobe Audition. I do have things set up like this. I have a template, and so that's the nice thing about Adobe Audition, is because you can take all of your effects, your tracks, your labels, and things like that, and you can save it as a template. Now, the nice thing about that is I also, for the person that I edit their podcast for, one of the people I edit their podcast for, they send me is the single voice track. I have the music track, but they do use a Rodecaster, but they're not doing it like me. They're not playing it and recording it at the same time. They are just sending the raw file to me of the voice. And so what I also do then is I also, at the beginning, I have the music at the very beginning in the track, in the template, as well as my volume ducks, because I do start loud and then I quickly go down, duck it as the person talks, and kind of, it is a track that kind of builds volume. So I kind of try to keep that volume at a lower level so you can hear the host still speak. So I have all of that saved in my template, because what that allows me to do then is open Adobe Audition, open that template, drag, create a new project, drag my audio track in it for the vocals, and then I pretty much have sounds and stuff ready to go and ready to get into the podcast and start editing. So that brings me to the point. Again, I don't edit my own shows that much, just because I know how I like it, and I know I've been doing this for a while. I know my sound. I know how to talk on mic where I'm not doing a lot of editing. But so here's what I do a little bit for other podcasts when I'm editing. So I use, for the most part, I line all my tracks up. And then if I'm doing a multi-track edit like this, I do a razor for the whole track. So if you can see in my, you can't see it right now because it's not showing up on the screen, but essentially what it does is it's a double razor. And what that means is that it's going to cut all of the tracks at the same spot. So for instance, if I want to get rid of this spot here, I click here, and then I shift. No, sorry. Not shift. Control. No, it's not. It's option. There you go. Sorry. I'm having trouble getting it in there right now. Sorry. Command. I select all my tracks, and then I shift delete. And what that does is it takes and removes that section and brings all of the audio up that I removed. So in other words, it shifts everything. So I'm pretty quick at doing that. I can hit so when I'm editing, what I do is I start from the beginning and I play the podcast. And I like to leave sounds that are natural in there. So there are people who cut all of the spacing out of the podcast. They just make it bam, 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 bam. And that's a little bit hard on your ears because you don't have any time to process what the person is saying. In natural speech, there are pauses. There are times that you wait and you kind of just let the person think. Now, I get the idea that you want it to sound like you're professional, and so you cut all of those out. You cut all the spaces out. I don't cut all of them out. What I do is I try to tighten things up just a little bit. So if you've left more pauses than are natural, I try and tighten that up a little bit. So I remove gaps that are like 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I try to move them and down into, so there's like 1, maybe 1.5 seconds. But as I'm doing this, I'm listening. If I cut, a lot of times I'll go back and listen to sound. Okay, is this sounding natural? Because you do want it to sound natural. So you want the audio to sound natural. So you cut in there. If it's too close, what I end up doing is I just back it back out. So let's say I went in here and I cut this out here. I went bam, 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 bam. I cut it out and it was too close. So then what I do is I go back in, I select my tracks, and I can just then drag just a little bit of space in here. And the nice thing is if you have your effects rack set up well so that when you're not talking, the track is silent, you won't notice this in here because this blank spot that I just moved in here sounds exactly the same as this blank spot over here where I just stopped talking. And so what that allows you to do is you can then kind of move things around. Now, that being said, again, I try to remove spaces. What I encourage my clients to do when we are talking about them recording their own podcasts, what I do is I encourage them to take, and if they mess up, I encourage them to just take a spot and wait 5, 10, 15 seconds. That way I can see visually that there's a huge space in there. And so I know usually it's really easily, I can edit faster because I know when I see that 5, 10, 15 second blank space that probably was messed up or you didn't like the way it sounded. So then what I do is I skip to where you start talking next and hear the sentence that you started to repeat. So let's say you said, "Hi, my name is Andy, but I am a," and then you froze. You wait 15 seconds. You start it again. "Hi, my name is Andy, and I am a podcaster," and go. And then I know, okay, I can go back and cut that section out. So I would encourage you to do that same thing because it allows you, even if you're editing your own podcast, you may not be editing it right after you record. So you may not remember that 15 minutes into your podcast, you made a mistake. But if you wait 15 seconds, you're going to see that on the timeline. You're going to see that you messed that up. You're going to see that there's a space there. and you're going to go, okay, I really need to go and just get in there and I need to edit that. So that being said, the next thing that I do is I try to just make sure that for the most part, since I'm recording and if I mess up, I go like that. Now it gets a lot harder if you have content that you're editing for artistic style, where you're having music and sound effects and things like that come in. That's a whole different style of podcast, and I enjoy doing that. It is a lot harder to edit because what I've had to do, like if I'm trying to rearrange the flow of content instead of just going straight through, but like let's say I start talking about this topic now, editing more advanced content, and I start talking about that first, and then I talk about how I normally edit later, but I'm going to rearrange that topics and that stance. That gets a whole lot harder to do. What I've had to do in the past is I've actually taken the audio through a speech to text recognition software, and I've taken it and laid it out so I can read it physically, and I've kind of highlighted it and said, okay, I want to move this block of stuff here and this block of stuff here and stuff like that. So I've kind of laid that out in my head as opposed, it's a little bit easier because you can see the words. And so you may not know that the time in the podcast that's going to happen, but it's easy then once you've had it and you can kind of lay that out physically, how you want that to sound and how you want that to flow, to go back in and chop those into sections and move them around and make it sound right. So that's a little bit how I do that. But again, I don't do a whole lot of editing on my own shows. And I would encourage, if you can do it, do what I do, because I really like being able to just, be in there. I have, my Rodecaster, so I can play sound effects right away if I want to have a bell ring or if I want to have someone say something like
what we do? Share this on your socials and tell everyone.
I have all of those as sound effects right on my Rodecaster, so I can just push those, go right into it if I want to go into it, and I don't have to go back in and add them later. But the nice thing again is if you do multi-track like me, so I do multi-track and I do throw them into Adobe Audition because I do have it run some effects chains on it just to make sure all of my volumes are level and sounds good. But I do multi-track that, so I have that information with me and I'm able to do it. And if I do decide that I don't want that bell in there, I can just cut that out and no one's going to know what happened, because I do have the option to edit because I am recording in multi-track. I do have all of the tracks that I can bring in later into my editing software and do that. So tell me, how do you edit podcasts? Do you edit podcasts? Do you edit your podcast? What is your workflow on that? I would love to know. You can contact me at podcastanswers.com/contact. I would love to talk to you about podcasting. If you don't know how to or don't want to edit your own podcast, I am available for that. Get a hold of me, podcastanswers.com/contact. I would love to talk to you about starting your show and getting you on this podcasting journey and helping you be a better podcaster all around. So with that, have a great week, guys, and keep podcasting.